Welcome back, everyone, in Cyberland. This is episode 241 of Fine Music. Notice the retro background. That's just because we're old guys, except that new guy. But we'll talk about him later. For now, we have the man who always bats first, Fred Whitlock.
Today I'm going to talk about folk rock singer P.F. Sloan.
Oh, yeah.
He was a pop singer-songwriter along with Steve Berry. They wrote a bunch of pop surfing songs, car songs. He started writing some serious stuff, and he wrote Eve of Destruction. Barry McGuire recorded it and didn't get much airplay because of the whole thing about the whole world was on its way to destruction, but it became a #1 single. And Dunhill, who he was writing and producing for, signed him up as a recording artist. Some of the other people that recorded his songs were the Searchers, Take Me for What I'm Worth, Johnny Rivers, Secret Agent Man, the Grassroots, Where Were You When I Needed You. The Turtles did a couple of his songs, had a hit with You Baby. The Mamas and Papas recorded some of his songs. There were quite a few. The list is long. He had been recording as a guitarist and session man and songwriter since he was 16 years old. He was off and on a guitarist in the Wrecking Crew in the LA session scene. And he came out with his first album in '65, Songs of Our Times. And then in '66, 12 More Times. But the press was not very kind to him since he had grown and became a more serious songwriter. The press thought he was just jumping on the protest bandwagon, the Bob Dylan bandwagon, and gave him a hard time. In fact, some people called him the poor man's Dylan. But those two albums are excellent albums and an excellent view of folk rock in the '60s. And I don't think they're no longer available, but there's an anthology of his Dunhill years available. And there's a collection called Here Where I Belong, P.F. Sloan, Phil Sloan. And there's over 27 songs on this CD. It's an incredible collection of the two albums. They cut off 2 songs from the second album, but it has some beautiful songs like Painted Ocean, From a Distance, Cause Eve of Destruction's on it.
Is Halloween Mary on there?
Out of your mind. And he does, but the album ends with 4 or 5 cuts that were never on an album before. They were singles, and his last single he did for Dunhill is I Can't Help But Wonder Elizabeth, a beautiful, beautiful song. And this is a great collection of '60s folk rock. And then another Dunhill collection came out a number of years later. It's a collection of demos he did. It's called Songs of Our Times, and it's a whole bunch of songs that he wrote and was in hopes of other people picking them up. And if you're a Phil Sloan fan, you'll love the album. And then he left Dunhill. He had a falling out with them, and they didn't want to lose him because he was a great songwriter and he was writing a bunch of hits. But they also didn't want him to become very big as a single artist. They didn't want to pay him more. And then they fought over music rights, and they took away his songs, the credits to his songs. He never made any money after that off his famous songs. That fight with that record company years later, he continued years on and led to mental illness. He had a breakdown. But in 68, he was on Atco Records. Tom Dunn, the famous rhythm and blues and Atlantic Records who produced Eric Clapton and other artists, took him down to Muscle Shoals, and for a subsidiary of Atlantic Records, Atco, he recorded the album Measure of Pleasure. It's a great album, kind of funky, and the songs are a little bit longer, and they don't have a lot of big hooks on them, and I guess that's why radio never picked up on it. And Atlantic put out a few ads and stuff, and there was a few reviews. It's a solid album. He has a kind of stream of consciousness in some of the songs, and of course with the musicians in Muscle Shoals, great music background. Then he disappeared for another 4 or 5 years, and in 72 came out with the album Raised on Records. I was working at a record store then when this, managing a record store on Cape Cod, and this album, I played it all the time. I loved it. Some people found it just a little too gentle. It was in the singer-songwriter frame of that time of the early 70s, sort of Elton John-ish, James Taylor style stuff. He had great session men again backing him up, but he was on a small label called Mum, and it was distributed by Capitol and Epic Records, and they didn't do much to promote it. And sometimes I guess some people thought it was too soft rock for them, or they just didn't care about someone who came out of the 60s. But this album has some great songs on it. The Raised on Records is the title song, and it's about, if it wasn't for the music, I still wouldn't be here. I was raised on records. And that really hit my heart, because that's how I always felt. I was raised on records. There's some other great songs like The Night Train Girl, Turn on the Light, and Midnight Girl on that album. It should have done much better. It should have got some radio play, at least on FM radio. But as you were going into the 70s, corporations were slowly taking over FM radio and cutting down on the amount of freestyle work you could do in a studio and a radio. Then in 73, he went to Japan and recorded an album, Serenade of the Seven Sisters. It finally got released in 93, called Still on the Eve of Destruction. And it's a 90s background rock, soft rock album. And it's got some really good songs on it. Brothers in the Wind, Sleeping at Dog's Log, Hello, Remember Me. It's a good album. And again, it was on a very small label that didn't get much distribution. But then in 2014, he, through some people in LA, he met John Tiven, who was a musician of his own, a rock writer in the 70s, who I used to write to some letters. He was an editor of New Haven Rock Press, a fanzine, which got a lot of attention. I think he might have ended up writing for Rolling Stone, but then he moved to Nashville and became a musician with his wife and a producer. So he produced P.F. Sloan, Sail Over, for High Tone Records. And he re-records one of his very early singles, Sins of a Family, which actually didn't get airplay because it was about a teenage prostitute in the 60s. But he re-recorded it, and Lucinda Williams is on the cut singing with him. He's got Frank Black on a couple of cuts singing with him. He's got Felix Cavalieri from the Rascals on the album. He's got Tom Peterson from Cheap Trick on a couple of cuts, and Tippin and his wife play several instruments. And also there's one more famous person. Who am I thinking of? Gary Tolland, the bass player from E Street Band, is on the album also on a couple of cuts. So I highly recommend this. He's in fine form, fine writing form. He re-recorded some of the older songs, like I said, Sins of the Family, Halloween Mary, Where Were You When I Needed You? And the rest of the songs are all brand new songs. Unfortunately, he came out with one more album, My Beethoven. Now, this is just for a P.F. Sloan fan. It isn't folk rock, it isn't rock. He worked on this for 17 years. And in interviews, he says he can't even remember writing the songs. But he raised the money and he recorded this album. It was his last album in 2014 with a string orchestra. And it's a sort of musical biography of Beethoven. An inner look at Beethoven, written by P.F. Sloan and performed by P.F. Sloan. So I only recommend this for a P.F. Sloan fanatic fan, but I highly recommend sail over and look for his early material. There's a couple of collections. You can't not enjoy his music. He'll never let you down. That's my attitude.
So
Yes.
this movie is passed on. You said it was his last album, so I assume he.
Yeah, My Beethoven. His friends, from what I understand, his friends tried to talk him into doing another folk rock, pop rock album, but had been writing this for many years, and it was like a dream for him to do. And I guess he knew he was dying. He had pancreatic cancer.
Okay.
So he wanted to do this Beethoven project and get it out.
Wow. I must be totally wrong, but he never did a rock opera, did he?
No,
No.
this is almost, the Beethoven thing is almost like a rock
Yeah.
Opera, a rock opera.
Maybe that's what I read about. I know I read something, but now I know. Thanks to you, Fred. Very interested in the early material too.
Oh, if you
so
like
many
folk
people,
rock, you'll like P.F. Sloan.
so many covered his songs, right? Is there a collection of those?
So many. He wrote, just pop songs before the band started doing his songs. He wrote for a bunch of Fantastic Baggies. He wrote some hot rod songs. And
I think you said, "Where Were You When I Needed You"? Is that the Grassroots song?
He wrote that.
He wrote that too. Wow.
Wrote "Where Were You When I Needed You" that the Grassroots did.
Wow, he was something in his day. Oh, I hate to say it that way, but wow, at least he's got a legacy.
Go on the internet, you'll see a huge list of songs that he wrote and other people did.
All right, I will. I definitely will. Okay, gang, that's episode 241 of Fine Music. Definitely a mine worth venturing into. Thank you, Fred.